Boeing CEO talking to the president about that tweet yesterday related to airplane technology. What's the impact of the president's tweet suggesting that planes have gotten too technologically advanced?
Well, actually, automation has a long history of improving safety, efficiency, productivity, throughput, all the positive aspects you would want. Automation has a long history of showing its ability to do that, but that's automation done well. If automation isn't done well, then it can be a problem. It can generate more harm than good if it isn't done well. But aviation industry has shown a capability over the decades to do it well in a number of ways. First, they bring pilots into the simulators during the development phase so that the automation doesn't ever leave the factory without extensive human factors experience. So they know it's not just some designer saying this would be a good idea, but it's actually pilots flying the simulator in the development stage. The second thing is that once the automation is out there, then the pilots get frequent and recurrent training on how to use the automation. And last but not least, if all of that doesn't work, the industry has a near-miss reporting system that's non-punitive so that pilots can report problems that they're encountering. So there are several ways to help make sure that the automation is done well, and the automation done well has been a big boost to the industry over the decades.
So, Chairman, tell me, you say that you agree that grounding the MAX 8 is not warranted at this point. Former American Airlines CEO Bob Crandall was just on with us a little earlier saying that Boeing, the FAA, airlines, and pilots are the most qualified to make that call. And right now in the U.S., they say they have faith in this aircraft. What's at stake if the U.S. were to make the opposite call and ground this aircraft? What would the damage be in your view?
Well, the damage would obviously be that that would reduce the people who still have confidence in it. That would make them doubt whether that's the case. But in my view, grounding is not appropriate for this type of event. What grounding is appropriate for is for failures, mechanical failures that disable the airplane and disable it in a way that a pilot can't do anything about it in the moment. So, for example, if a wing comes off in flight, there's nothing a pilot can do about that. And since the manufacturing processes are so standardized, if one wing comes off in flight, then you don't know, you can assume that other wings will come off in flight too. So that's an event for grounding the airplane. So in my professional career, the FAA has grounded airplanes twice. First in 1979 when the DC-10 departing Chicago O'Hare had an engine depart from the wing, and there's nothing a pilot can do about that in the moment. The second one is much more recent in 2013 when the Boeing 787 was experiencing problems with their lithium-ion batteries. And that means a fire on the plane. And if you have a fire on the plane, there's not much pilots can do about that. And the FAA immediately grounded in both of those instances as soon as they had a problem. That's what grounding is for. Grounding is not for this type of situation where there's an unfortunate, undesirable interaction between the pilot and the airplane, because that's what most crashes are, results of undesirable interaction between the pilot and the airplane. And if you grounded for that, you'd be grounding after almost every crash. So that is not an event for grounding.
If there is a significant issue with trim, as some have theorized on the Lion Air crash, how is that different? Is that not a situation in which the pilot has no control?
No, the pilot has complete control to stop the trim out of trim condition, and that's why when the FAA saw the Lion Air recordings and realized what happens, it immediately issued an airworthiness directive that said you need to put information in the manual about what to do if this happens. And I'm going to recommend that the airlines, if I were an airline, I would be looking at those additions to the flight manual, and I would say I don't want my pilots to fly this plane until they've not only read the additions in the manual but actually been in the simulator and flown to see what those additions in the manual are telling them. So that, to me, that's the answer, is A, to fix the automation, and Boeing is working on that as we speak, but B, the airline should have increased the training to bring the pilots in the simulator before they fly that airplane again to make sure that they understand exactly what to do in the case of a malfunction of the system.
So you would not be in favor of the FAA grounding, but you might be okay with an airline, a specific carrier, saying we're going to wait until our pilots have additional training?
Yes, I don't refer to that as a grounding. I would just say make sure that the pilots are trained to what the FAA required in the airworthiness directive be added to the flight manual.
Chris, here's what I'm trying to figure out. The U.S. has long had this reputation as sort of the top regulator in terms of safety where aviation is concerned. I get that the bar is very high and there are very technical reasons here in the U.S. why you would be grounding aircraft. But the fact that so many countries are breaking with that stance and taking the opposite approach, and now you have the CEO of Ethiopian Airlines saying that they're looking to deliver those black boxes to Europe rather than the U.S. Is this, at least from an optics perspective, doing damage to the U.S.?
No, I think in quite the contrary. The FAA has a long-standing tradition, and the two groundings that I mentioned are examples of that, has a long-standing tradition of going where the data tells them to go. And that's what happened in those two groundings. The data told them they needed to put those planes on the ground because you don't want another engine coming off and you don't want another battery fire in the airplane. So the FAA has a long-standing tradition of going where the data tells them, and that's what they're doing today. And that's what they did when they issued the Airworthiness Directive in November, to say we need to add information to the flight manual so that pilots are very well aware of how to handle the situation if it arises.
All right, an important expert perspective. Chris Hart, former NTSB chairman. Thank you.
Well, let me add one more thing. It's important, you mentioned in the introduction, it's important to note that the pilots who are the experts in this, and they certainly have as much at stake as anybody, as they say, the pilots are the first to arrive at the scene of the crash. They are not calling for grounding. So that speaks volumes, that they are not calling for grounding, plus the fact that this airplane has thousands and thousands of event-free hours.